So today we are going to throw on the wheel. This is a standard white ball clay, so when fired it's going to come out a much brighter white. Other clays that you may see in schools are a red ball clay. These do not have sand included in them, so they are not as gritty. They're much smoother when worked on the wheel, when glazing, and they have a really nice finish to them. So what I did was I started with some of this white ball clay. This is pretty moist. You don't want it to be too dry, you don't want it to be too wet. And I kneaded it. The reason we knead is to get all the air bubbles out and all the clumps out. You want a very consistent air bubble free clay. This will be easier to throw with. It won't collapse on you. You're not going to have air pockets. When you have air pockets, it'll explode in the kiln. So I kneaded it and then I formed it into a softball shape. And I have a bat on my wheel and I'm going to find the center. And I'm going to slam it down, push it, and I'm going to make sure that it is centered onto my wheel. Now to start, I'm going to get my hands wet. You want to keep your hands wet the whole time you're working with clay, especially on the wheel. If your hands are dry or the clay is dry, your hands are going to grab the clay and it's going to tear right off. So keep your hands wet, keep your clay wet. You don't want it so oversaturated that it comes right off the wheel. So I have my hands wet and I'm going to take this wheel, and this is an electric wheel, it's not a kick wheel, and I'm going to go full speed. Now I have my elbows anchored right on the inside of my thighs and I am leaning right over the clay. And what I want to do is I have my two hands and I want to lock them. Now I center with my left hand on the outside, my right hand on top. So what I want to do is I want to put that there and I want to lock. I'm locking my thumbs over my hand and I'm going to push right down. I'm using my left hand and I'm pushing in, and I'm using my right hand and pushing down. And sometimes you can go a little outside, so I kind of help with the outside hand there with my right. Some centering techniques tell you to do a cone. I like this way where you lock it. I'm right over my clay. I'm going to get some of this excess clay off. This is your rib. Ribs typically come in wood or rubber. I prefer the rubber ones. I don't feel that they catch as easy. I'm going to use my rib and I'm going to just take it and scrape the wheel and get some of this excess clay off. So you'll know it's centered when you don't see it wobbling back and forth. And I don't pull my hands away. Notice when I pull my hands off, I'm not pulling them away too fast. If you pull them away real fast, you can knock it off center. So I'm going to keep my hands on it and I'm going to pull them away slowly. And you'll see it's centered because you don't see it wobbling back and forth. And from the top, I see a nice even circle going around. I don't see any variation in the spinning. So I'm going to clean off some of this excess clay. I don't need all this clay on my wheel for the next process. I'm just using the sponge. You can use the rib. And the next process is to slow the wheel down. The faster it goes, the more chance you have of error, of knocking it off center. So what I want to do next is I want to find the center of my clay. So I'm going to keep my elbows locked. I'm leaning over and I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to find it to where my finger is not moving back and forth. Much like when we just centered the whole ball clay, you want to do with your finger to find the center. So I found the center. I'm going to kind of drill down with my finger. And I don't want to go too far. If I go too far, I go right through the bottom and you just ruined your whole project. So looking at the height of the clay, it's about the length of my finger. So I'm going to go at least halfway, a little further. I kind of got stuck there. So drill that. I'm still keeping my elbows locked and my hands locked. So next step, now that I have my center drilled, is I'm going to take two fingers and I'm going to pull towards me. You want to pull slowly. Notice the wheel's still going slow. If you pull slow, you have a better chance of keeping a very even pot the whole way around. And I do feel a lump in here, which is great because I do want to show you this. I kneaded really well. I kneaded for about 5 minutes, but I still have a slight air bubble. And you'll know you have an air bubble when you feel this little lump while you're working with the clay. So I'm going to slowly stop the wheel. Let me find my air bubble again. And I'm just going to pop my air bubble, and I'm just going to use a tool over here. And I have the air bubble right here, so I'm just going to pop it with my knife tool, and I don't have to worry about it because I found it. So I'm slowly working the wheel. I have my hands locked, my elbows anchored. So I have this nice little form going. And I want it to be taller. I don't want this big wide bowl. I don't want a serving dish. I want to do more of a bowl, like a soup bowl. So keeping my hands wet, and I'm going to use my sponge for this next process. I'm going to work one hand inside, one hand outside. The wheel is still going slow. And the first thing I'm going to do is start at the bottom, and I'm going to do even pressure applied as I pull straight up. So my inner fingers are matching the sponge on the outside as I pull up, and it's going a little off center, so I'm going to stop for a minute. And I'm going to just kind of refocus the energy back into the center. So pull even pressure all the way up. Now I'm not really happy with the lip of this. It's a little uneven, it's very bulky. So I'm going to trim off the top of my little form here. And what I do is I use the wire. And when I use the wire, I wrap it around my fingers so that I have about 2 inches in the center. Now going the same speed I'm going right now, I'm slowly just gonna find it and drop it in. I'm gonna hold it there for a second and pull off. And there is my trim right off the top of my form. So now I have a nice even lip to work with. So I can still take more clay up. So going slow, I'm going to work from the bottom and apply even pressure up. You don't want to push too much pressure. This will cause thin spots and it's just going to cause it to collapse. So this is going to be a process. You're going to take your time and you're working it slowly. So now that I've used the sponge for most of the bulk, I'm just going to use my fingers. I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to work from the bottom. I'm just going to slowly work my way up. Keep my fingers wet. So now I like my tall figure here. It's kind of more of a cup or a small vase at this time. So I'm going to use my right hand. I'm right-handed. I'm going to lock it with my left hand. My hand is wet, and I'm just going to kind of create this bowl form. I'm just going to slowly pull my form out and stretch it. Don't be afraid to play with the clay. So I'm getting more of a tall bowl shape, which is what I'm going for. I'm going to continue to use my hands, and I'm slowly just moving my hand back and forth in the figure. I use both my hands. I'm going to choke it a little. Choking is when you take your hands and you kind of bring the clay back in, because my lip was kind of going out there. So I'm very happy with the form I have right now. Don't overwork the clay if you don't need to. The more you overwork it, the thinner it's going to get, and chances are it's going to end up collapsing in the end. So right now I have a lot of water on the inside, and the issue with having a lot of water in the inside of your clay, especially these ball clays that we use, it will cause cracking while it dries. Too much moisture is going to get in with the particles. So you want to take your sponge, make sure all the water is squeezed out, and then while the wheel's going slow, you just want to put it in there and kind of absorb some of that water out. This also helps smooth out any lines left on the inside that you may have left when you were forming your piece. So I got a lot of the moisture out. Using my wire tool, I'm going to trim again. So I'm going to wrap it around my fingers, about 2 inches. I just want to make sure I have a nice even lip at the end. So when it happens like that, just slowly stop your wheel, pull your piece out, and just drop it in your little reclaim pile. All clay that you don't use is just going to go right back in the reclaim bucket, because the most amazing thing about clay, and this is why I love working with ceramics, is that if it's not fired, it's reusable. So when you mess up, it's okay, because you can just use that clay again once it's re-wetted down. So I have a nice even little rim going. To smooth it out, I'm going to use the crevice between your fingers. I'm just going to go over. I'm going to squeeze, and it makes a nice smooth lip to your bowl or cup. So I have this great form, but I have this really not so pretty foot to the bottom of it. And the less trimming you have to do at the end, the better. So I have a few tools here. I have the knife tool, which it's called a knife tool because it has a knife end to it. I have your metal trimming tools, one with a rounded and one with a squared off end. And then I have this jagged tool, but I like this little pointed end because this little pointed end, much similar to the end of the knife tool, is much smaller, so it's easier to work with. And that's where I'm going to start with. So going towards the bottom of my bowl, I'm going to go slow, and I just want to scrape away some of that excess clay. I'm going to follow up with my knife tool, and I'm going to make sure the edge is nice and clean, and I'm going to come in at an angle. Get some of this clay off. And if you go in at an angle, like you're slicing it, it's going to create this nice, even, clean bottom. And you just flip it over, and coming in at an angle, you're going to scoop all that clay away. And just clean off your knife when you're done. And trimming the bottom might take some time. You might have to go back and forth between tools. So I'm going to come back to the jagged edge tool with the rounded edge and kind of create more of a foot in the bottom here. I can take a little off the bottom of my piece. I'm going to finish with the trimming tool with the metal ends. And I'm just going to create a nice squared off edge. I'm going to get some of these clumps off that happen here. You can go around, and you might have to just use your hands and pull some of these pieces off. I'm going to go around. Oh, here's another I missed. And they'll peel off really nice and easy. I'm just going to use the knife tool one more time. Get that nice little point in the bottom. Leave chunks. And I am done. Now, if you are using a wheel like mine, where you have bats that come right on the wheel, all you have to do is remove your bat, and you're ready to go. If you do not have a bat on your wheel, you're going to need to trim the piece off and lift it. So let me show you how to do that. Using my friend the wire tool that we used to trim the top, we're going to use to trim the bottom. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you have a good length of wire. You're going to push it flat down. You may need to kind of lean more over it. You're just going to pull it as flat down on the bat as you can. If you want to do it while the wheel is moving, you just go at a slow pace. It's the same thing. To remove it, you're going to take your thumbs and your middle fingers, and you're going to find the foot, and you're going to lift. And it's going to go a little wonky at first, and because you have to lift off, it's going to be a little off center, but once you place it onto a board or bat, it needs a little bit of reforming and you're good. So I wanted to show you what I've done on here. I'm going to cut mine in half to show you the wall thickness. So I'm going to take my wire, and this don't do. This is just to show you how I threw. Now I still have some trimming to do. So as you can tell, on the bottom of my piece, it is a little thicker along the bottom here. So that when I go back in, once it's leather hard or dry, I can just take tools such as my metal tool, my metal trimming tool, and go in and add a little more detail or take more clay out. But if you notice, down the wall of my clay, it is even. And that's because while I was throwing, I applied an even pressure slowly while going up. Now this is a good thickness. It's not too thin, it's not too thick. If the walls are too thin, it can collapse. If the walls are too thick, it's going to be a very heavy piece. So it's a good thickness. I'll trim down here, and with the bottom of my bowl, I had a good thickness where I would take a little out. So just have a foot rim, which would be really lovely. So once I'm done throwing, I would put it on the shelf and I would let it get leather hard where I would trim or dry where I would trim. There's two different processes, and that would be another day to teach. So thank you.